Another key aspect of test development is getting to your test cases. Your test cases is very specifically, what are you testing on any given system? If it's a website, how do I test each page? If it's a desktop application, how do I test each screen? If it's a batch job, how do I test each flow of inputs, whether it's files or databases or whatever that's happening between those? So a test case then is a very explicit set of directions that ensures that your system's working properly. You execute your test based off those test cases, and you capture the results of executing the test, and then you evaluate whether everything worked. One of the very first jobs I had was around testing. I was starting on a new GPS receivers project. It was too new to actually build any code at that point. I was days out of college, but the way you want to get familiar with a big system like that, great opportunity is to test it. And so my job was to actually automate test cases. Now in this case, it's not really screens that's involved. We literally had this test rack down below, and you plugged in your GPS receiver, and it would drive around in the virtual world. Pretend satellites giving pretend signals that would turn into real data. And so the results was a flow of numbers that was stored into a file. Like every few seconds, every minute, whatever the test was calling for, it would say what's its latitude and longitude and such like that. And then our test evaluation would be get those values and then compare it to where it's supposed to be. And again, it's not looking for exact numbers. There's some fuzz inside of there. So it actually had a piece of software that evaluated, was it doing well? How accurate was it? How close was it there? They evaluate what's happened. And so in this case, there was a lot of automation. There was a lot of formality in the test that's happening. And we want to use that level of automation and formality as much as we can, or at least have documented what we're expecting to see. So not all test cases have to be that formal. You could have a general framework saying, hey, you're going to sit down, you're going to use this user, run around and click some stuff. It makes for less test planning, but it makes it really hard to have those tests be repeatable. I know I worked on one project where the testers did exactly this. They got to the site, they played with some stuff, and the first question for us was always, okay, well, what did you do? What user was you using? What were you clicking on? What combination of stuff? Because sometimes we could not figure it out. They would hit the back button and the forward button and the left and right, and just things that are plausible that your user could do, but not sensible that a user would do. And to some degree, your website or your app, if the users are doing something crazy, all you can really ask of your site is just fail and say, hey, start over, please. And that's what our site was doing. But they somehow thought we should make it so no matter what you did, however silly, it would somehow do something useful. So the long short of that story was they actually started taking screenshots every step of the way so we knew what the heck they were doing, which took more time than just planning out the test in some reasonable way to begin with. And so normally we want to formalize our test cases. We want to know exactly the approach. What are you trying to test? For this test case, I want to know that I can buy stuff. I want to know that I can look up my flight itinerary that I already bought. We want to be able to have that repeatable execution. We want to know what data was set ahead of time. I can't tell you how many times I've hunted down test cases that were, the software worked perfectly fine. It was the data set up for the test that was wrong. It's the testing would set up data in the background that would never possibly end up like that. It's not possible through the system. And then it would fail and then be like, oh, your code's broken. Yes, the code's broken if you could never end up in that situation. Yes, a bicycle does not ride well on the bottom of the ocean. How the heck did you get a bicycle on the bottom of the ocean? I don't want to blame everything on testing. I have a bend from a developer side, to be honest. But from a test side, the best way to get around those silly developers and their sanctimonious, we don't ever do anything wrong, is to have a clear, documented approach. Say, hey, you don't believe us, try the test yourself. Here's exactly what we did, step by step. If you disagree with the steps, let's talk about that, but let's not disagree with the results. We did exactly what we said. We get clear expected results. This is what we thought would happen. This is what actually happened. Tell us if we are misunderstanding what's supposed to be happening here. Even better, if we automate all that, then you can press a button and see the results without having to step through it all. I know that automation takes a lot of time, but how amazing is it when you want to say, let's try the test again, boom. Oh, it failed. Let's try the test again, boom. Oh, now it passed. Just instantly that quick, and some tests can do that. So all of this needs to start as you're looking to write test cases with the idea of a scenario. A test scenario is this what-if exercise of, I need to come up with a story. Who is my main character? What is their motivation? What is the backstory behind their life? A good story is not just Tony went to the store and he wanted to buy some peas. Okay, so why did Tony choose that store? What is he buying the peas for? That background gives us a little bit more depth of that character. It's a more interesting story. Same with tests. I want to be able to know, okay, what's Tony's data that's going to be typed into this site? What is his user configuration that's set up? What types of peas is he buying? What's the cost of those peas? When I ring up the peas, is the expected results based off the tax rate, based off of the cost of the peas, based off of the charge to the credit card, whatever it's going to be. And I'm going to document each of those steps along the way. See exactly what screens am I seeing? What buttons am I pressing? How's it going to go? There's some flexibility in that. I don't have to be ridiculously over the top of that. I want to at least grab the intent. I at least want to know, for this story, this is what I expect to have happening. Because the first thing I want to check out is, does this story make sense? This story not making sense might actually underlie a problem in the requirements, saying, hey, this is what I thought the requirements said. Oh, no, that's not what I thought the requirements said. Well, what do they say? So tests, building these test scenarios can actually be a form of testing the requirements and the design in itself. Now, imagining the scenarios can be very difficult if you have traditional requirements. You have to really put them together based off of any visualizations of the user interface, if you have wireframes, which in this case you do, any documented requirements, and your job is to connect the dots to trying to figure out what the scenarios look like. It generally works well, but in order to have a really good picture, you have to have a strong RTM there, requirements traceability matrix. What are all the requirements that are part of this test case that we're trying to do, this test scenario we're trying to come up with? Now, if you wrote use cases, the test scenarios are much easier because the use cases show you the primary flow and secondary flows and exception flows, and your only job really is to supply the data needed for those use cases. So if you have use cases or at least descriptions of them, you're just saying, hey, step 1, here's the data for it. Step 2, here's the data for it. Step 3, here's the data for it. Step 4, here's what you expect to see on the screen. So that is a much easier way of constructing this because somebody has already imagined what the user's seeing and what the users are doing. Now, the important thing to capture then is you want to know who the user is and what steps they're going to take. What's the data they would be inputting to the system, and then what's the expected response. I can't tell you how many times I thought I put in a 5, I put in a 6 because I typed it wrong, and then we get the expected results. It's like, yep, it's broken. It's wrong. It's the test case failed. Boom. I mean, one of the keys to being a good tester is if you fail a test case, immediately do it again and try it again. Just make sure you didn't screw up in typing stuff in. Again, automation. Then you know what was done. But if not, you got to double check it. But that's what you want to know is, what did I type in? Was it what I expected to type in? And then was the response what I expected to get out of that? At that point, if you have these pieces, then you can recreate it. You can judge it over again. You can try and see where you're at. Now, this is an example of that, kind of at a high level. Again, I'm not trying to expect that your application is fleshed out to the point of exact screens. We don't know what the field names are. We don't know what's going on. But in our little application, again, the imaginary application where I'm storing information about a collection, I have a new item I'm putting inside of it. The name of it is a Boba Fett action figure. The description is a Star Wars toy. It cost $7.99 when I bought it. And the date is, notice there, today. Sometimes your test cases have to be dynamic. It has to be based off of, if I put a static date inside of there, it might be before today or a year ago by the time it gets run. So it might be okay to say it's going to be today's date. And then user presses add and finish button. So whatever that means on the screens. And then we can see the expected results. What's based off of this action, what's the system going to do? We might not want big term last results. We want to go screen by screen. It's not necessarily absolutely critical, but it might be important to understand. There might be multiple paths to get through there. If we go through a different path, it could be the system's behaving wrong. It could be that the test data isn't what we expect it to be. Maybe it goes a different path for $7 products than it does anything over $7 products, something like that. So that's the expected results. It's going to show the data. Then right there, validate the data is shown above the item. It takes us to another screen, and then we check out. Again, we don't have to be overly meticulous on this. We don't have to say, is the price $7.99? Is the description Star Wars? Just, hey, this is the data up above. Make sure step 1 and step 2 matches. Step 3, press the edit button, blah, 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 blah. You go through there. So it's really clear what I'm going to do. I'm not making it up. I'm literally following the instructions inside of there. These instructions are a little bit vague because it's an imaginary set of screens. If you have a real set of screens, you can be more detailed. You can take screenshots if you want to. Instead of typing in all the data into your Excel spreadsheet or whatever the table is, you can take a screenshot and show the data in place, if that makes more sense. Sometimes it's a bit of a pain because you can't copy and paste it, but at least you can see where the data should go. There's no question about which fields are looking like or how the data should look when it goes there. So what we're largely looking at here is what's called black box testing. We're looking at the requirements and we want to know what the system's doing in response to the requirements. We don't care how it's doing it. We're going to test each and every one of the requirements and all the business rules and all the details of that, but we don't know or care about, well, where's this data stored, or what protocol is used to load it up, or what encryption scheme was being used. Those are things that, unless there's an explicit requirement, we probably just kind of let go. We're looking from a usability standpoint. Is the system functioning the way I wanted it to function? It doesn't necessarily mean there's not hidden bugs inside of there, but that's why we have the phased testing approach we talked about before. Unit testing would probably pick up some of those inner details a little bit easier than you would at the system level. Sometimes there's 2 bugs that are offsetting that make it look like everything behaves right, but somewhere behind the scenes things are flip-flopped or something like that. So this is our goal of the test cases that we're trying to look at, is give us a high-level look at some specific set of functionality, some specific part of your requirements, some use case you've written, something you've designed would be even better, something you can follow through from requirements to design, skipping implementation, straight into the test cases.